Hello and welcome to VFX Pros, Inside the Visual Effects of The Mandalorian, where we're going to sit down with visual effects supervisor Richard Bluff and talk a little bit about the making of The Mandalorian Season 1. My name is Miles Perkins, longstanding Visual Effects Society member. I'm really excited to be here. I'm also business development at Epic Games, really focused on film and television. I'm also excited to be here and speaking with someone who I've known probably since the early 2000s, Richard Bluff, visual effects supervisor. Richard is an award-winning visual effects supervisor. He's also a person who is well adept at making amazing visuals and visual environments, working and receiving awards on such projects as the Avengers, the Iron Man series, Avatar, Chronicles of Narnia, and dare I go back to some of the earliest memories I have with him back on Peter Pan and Hidalgo. But needless to say, I'm really excited to be sitting here speaking with Richard Bluff. Although we're at our respective homes, it's just like we're in the same room together. Richard.
Thanks, Miles. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Richard, I thought it might be good for us to start off with a reel just to kind of set the table for what we'll be discussing today.
Yeah, I'm going to play, I'm going to screen share and I'm going to play the trailer. Obviously, the first visuals that anybody first saw of The Mandalorian when we first came out. So here we go.
Is the world more peaceful since the revolution? It is a shame that your people suffered. But bounty hunting is a complicated profession. They said you were coming. They said you were the best in the parsec. Would you agree? Mandalorian, look outside. They are waiting for you. Yeah? Good.
Well, I could watch the whole thing again, I have to say, even right now, but 15 Emmy nominations, VES awards, I think well-deserved. When I first saw that first episode, it was actually in the theater where we watched 3 episodes. And the thing I was struck with immediately was the scale was consistent with what we expect of Star Wars. And my assumption is that this is something that really came from the series creator, Jon Favreau. Could you speak a little bit to how, going into this, understanding the scope and scale that was going to be necessary, but on an episodic kind of budget, as it were? How did you guys think of and start to wrap your head around that?
It was interesting. If I go back, and you might remember this, Miles, was it like maybe 2007, 2008, when George was trying to get his live action TV show off the ground? He said himself right there and then that the scale of any live action TV show for Star Wars had to mimic what everybody has seen in the movies. It had to be uncompromising. And way back when I was involved in that production, while we were trying to understand how we would do that, George recognized that we needed a game-changing production shift to achieve Star Wars on the small screen for the scale, but also the shoot schedule that would be required. Now, obviously, you know, as you well know, we ran a bunch of tests and we had many conversations, and there was a bunch of theory. Clearly, we never imagined LEDs back then, but we knew we needed something different. Now, Disney bought Lucasfilm, and obviously that particular project was put on hold. And then when John approached Kathy and Lucasfilm, he had the same idea. He understood that the Star Wars on the small screen had to feel like the movies, at least the original movies. And of course, the way that John works is he takes inspiration from visuals while he's writing. So he joined forces with Doug Chiang very early on. And the way that Doug works, again, as you may well know, he creates aspirational art. He doesn't limit himself to the format. He wouldn't limit himself if this was an app on a phone, whether it's a game on the Xbox, for example, or a feature versus TV. And so between them, but primarily with John's writing, they just made sure the show had the scale and scope right from the very beginning. Now, for everybody else watching from sidelines, it was frightening because we knew that we hadn't solved the problem 10, 12 years prior with George. And at some point, they were going to start asking the same question. How are we going to make this?
Yeah, and I, you know, understanding that you've worked with John before and know how he interfaces with the imagery and the idea of the story and how collaborative he is, I could only imagine that kind of coming into this, you're kind of like, you know, probably a little bit nervous coming into, you know, especially because this is something that is ultimately launching Disney Plus, the streaming service. So, I mean, it was something that was extremely important. I would imagine that kind of gravitas was there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things to this is interesting because these are kind of questions that haven't really come up, I think, in a lot of conversations about the show. You know, ILM worked with John, obviously, on the first and the second Iron Man movies. And obviously, Roger Guyatt worked with him on Cowboys and Aliens. And then John, when he made The Jungle Book and Lion King, obviously worked with MPC and Weta and others. And so when John was invited back by Kathy to make this show, he now came with this huge reputation. Clearly, he'd done great work on Iron Man and on Cowboys and Aliens, but I don't think you can compare what that ask was to specifically Jungle Book and Lion King. The work is unbelievable. It's astonishing. And no filmmaker could go through the process of those two movies without thoroughly understanding pre-production, but more specifically post-production and what it takes to get the visuals to the level required. And so absolutely, knowing that John had got that experience and that level of work under his belt now, it made sure that we had to kind of sit up and we had to pay attention and we had to provide him with everything he needed to create his vision. It was really, really intimidating. But by the same token, he's a wonderful, wonderful collaborator. So we were all really excited.
Yeah. So at some point, you know, you guys had to decide on how you were going to proceed. I mean, it sounds like he and his collaboration with Doug Chiang already set the bar for what this was going to be. So can you talk a little bit about how you guys kind of came to the approach and how you're going to achieve that scope and scale?
Yeah, that's a bit of a longer story because Doug was working with John. John was writing the scripts, and John was working with his longtime collaborator, Dave Lowry, on storyboarding the episodes out. Every single frame of the series was storyboarded by Dave Lowry, and eventually it was previs by Third Floor. But early on, John was working with Dave and Doug. And so they had a huge amount of material produced. From those early stages, we didn't really understand how we were going to achieve this show. But more importantly, we didn't know yet how John wanted to shoot this. So our mind, or at least my mind, was gravitating towards how Game of Thrones was made, and imagining various different locations and returning to those locations in order to make it cost effective. And then I started reading the scripts and seeing the boards, and that was quite clear that wasn't a solve for us. And at the same time, John was really keen for us to visit his studio in Playa and see how he was making The Lion King, because I don't know if people remember this, but he was shooting The Lion King during writing The Mandalorian, and he was posting The Lion King during prep on The Mandalorian and shooting. It was a crazy schedule for him that he managed very well. So we came down and saw how he was working, obviously in Unity, shooting the previs for The Lion King, and then sending those files off to MPC as the template for them to render the post-production work. And it was a huge eye-opener. But for me, I still didn't quite see how it solved our problem and how it fitted in. And at that time, getting the time with John was few and far between for us, because again of everything that he was involved in and writing the stories, and he wasn't ready yet. He wasn't ready to engage with the solve. And so we internally started having conversations about game engines and how we could leverage it, because it was very clear that he wanted to leverage game engine technology, particularly Unreal, and push the scope. He'd had a sneak peek of the demo that you guys had done with in collaboration with ILM and Lucasfilm, the Stormtroopers in the elevator, and it was obvious that where the technology was going. So we started having conversations. We pulled Kim in from Epic, of course, about how we felt we could leverage this, and there was a number of things we talked about. We talked about shooting, prep, the scouting, mimicking and rebuilding production tools to allow us to scout the environments, to allow us to light the environments, to allow us to block them out, effectively take some of that work off of the shoulders of previs and do it in a more free-form VR headset manner. So there was obviously that process to us that was obvious, but it doesn't really make any inroads into how you're going to shoot it and do it differently. So then we started talking about, could we leverage the game engine technology in post-production? Could we render in real time versus rendering overnight? Is that a big enough win for us? Is that where we should be looking? And at that time we started engaging with John, and he really blew the doors off of what we thought were the limiting factors behind this technology. And he basically started describing a manner of utilizing a game engine technology that simply didn't exist. How do we build an environment, shoot within that virtual environment, and have it be a final? And he didn't elaborate more than that, but he talked about everything he'd done in the Jungle Book, whether it was the LEDs, whether it was the prep work. He talked about Lion King as well, and wanted ideas pitched. And so we went away. We pulled in Greg Fraser from who would be the DP on Rogue One. We pulled in Kim, various ILM R&D folks, Roger Cords, Rachel Rose, Rob Brado was there. There was a whole bunch of people, and we just started trying to figure out how we would do this. And for us, one of the ideas that immediately came to the surface, was obvious to us, was the LED technology, for a couple of reasons. One, ILM had past experience with this on Rogue One, in that we would project material onto the screen as previs to provide lighting on the character. And then in post, it would be replaced with the final imagery, but it would be based upon the foundation of the previs that was on the screen, which provided the lighting. So it was incredibly well integrated. But also, Kim, as you well know, was spearheading a project many years prior where he wanted to take a game engine level from 1313 that was developed by LucasArts in the particular game engine that it was built in, and he wanted to shoot a scene with that environment with coincidentally a Mandalorian with a helmet against an LED screen. And we were pitching the idea of having a platform with a light to see if you could shoot a platform in Coruscant with a big wide open vista. So there's no real interaction with the character, but there's some nice parallax and the ship's flying past with a practical light next to this character. Could you shoot that scene? The scene already existed in the game engine at the time and played through as a nice sizzle reel. Can we replace elements of that scene with something that's shot practical and get it to seamlessly blend? It was a brilliant idea and something that we were moving forward with, but for a variety of reasons. One of them is not having a filmmaker that has the vision and wanting to push it, because obviously ILM's focused on the filmmakers that are in-house at the time, and it got put on pause. So we dusted off the idea, and that was the basis of, well, instead of shooting in a headset, instead of shooting in the game engine itself and then bringing in blue screen elements, could we simply put actors in front of the LED screen and provide the LED screen as an environment that they're walking in front of? Again, taking the idea far beyond Kim's original idea, but without that idea, we wouldn't have been able to pitch the idea to John. And it was at that moment, it was myself, it was Greg Fraser and Rob Brado that went down there. Rob Legardo was in the meeting. And it was basically a full-on presentation as to what ILM had done on Rogue One, the various tests that they'd done at Pinewood after that shoot to try to figure out how far we could push this technology. I think they even showed the test that Kim was involved in very early on. And it was really a blue sky pitch as to how we think we could have shot the show. And at that point, John was interested in understanding, okay, well, how much of the show could we shoot this way? And myself and Kim and others pitched about 10 or 15%, and John immediately thought about this and said, let's aim for over 50%. And that was basically the pressure cooker we were now in.
I could only imagine. So which the rubber had to hit the road. So this test that I've heard about, what was the test, and what level of kind of did it make everybody feel like, okay, we can get 50% of this done this way?
Right, the test.
Good.
Let me do my screen share here. So the interesting thing to know about the test is that right from the very beginning, we were working towards October 1st shoot date. So when we were having conversations in March about how we were going to make the show, and we came up with this idea of shooting into LEDs with John and with his team, with Golem Creations, it was we had this ticking clock, and so in order to make sure that we could get to October 1st and have a viable technology, we knew we needed to test this out. So in the May timeframe, we did camera tests. But then in June, we actually came to the Manhattan Beach studios with a much, much smaller stage than we were going to have for October 1st to really prove out the technology. Now, it's worth pointing out that the mad sprint of about 10 weeks was from the moment we got from the moment we were greenlit with the idea to the moment we had to walk on the stage in June and prove that it worked. It was a 10-week sprint. It was a 10-week sprint for Epic, for ILM, for Profile, and for Lux Machina, and all of our partners at the time. And so Epic Games had their 40+ engineers, ILM had their 20+ engineers, and of course all our other partners. And we were really prototyping this technology. Epic obviously provided the engineering resources to actually drive the brain bar at that time, because most of the technology was, again, prototypes. It wasn't yet production ready. And if it worked, then we had to, again, have another mad sprint October to make sure it was production ready, and at which point they would hand off to ILM to run the stage. And so what we did was we had various environments. This is an environment that the Epic provided, the Ice Lake environment. And then ILM provided a bunch of photogrammetry environments that I'll get to in a second. And then Andrew Jones and his virtual art department produced numerous environments to test out a variety of different things, turntables, which I'll show in a second, and lots of other things. This, of course, allowed ILM to for the first time, bring in their patented green screen tracking, which, of course, limits the amount of green screen behind the actor, limits the amount of spill, which also allows us to maintain as much reflectivity and lighting contribution from LEDs as possible in a pan. Obviously, in a typical world, you'd be wrapped around with green, but in this particular instance, we wanted to protect the lighting contribution and reflections on the actor, particularly because he was reflective. And then the second week of the 2-week test was when we brought in the actor with obviously a prototype costume to shoot shots to create a sizzle reel in July to actually get the technology greenlit and get the thumbs up from the studios again for the October shoot date. So this is a very early test of the perspective correcting environment on the LED screen. And again, of course, our green screen tracking in there, because at the time we didn't know whether we were going to pull Mando off of the LED screen and replace the environment, or whether the environment was actually going to play in camera as a final. So we would protect ourselves with green screen. And it wasn't until we got to the shoot that we realized we could massively pull back on the amount of green we were putting up. And it was rare we ever threw green screens up. But again, we didn't know in the June timeframe. These are 4 environments. This is photography lat longs that was shot on location for various other Star Wars projects. So bottom right, we have Greenland there that's doubling for a Hoth environment, and so on and so forth. And the idea here is, of course, do you believe the lighting? I felt really strongly that we had to believe and we had to have faith that we could get photoreal content into the game engine. And what we should do in the test is focus on convincing the audience that the actor is photographed against a real background with the light contributing from the LED screen being real. If we threw environments on the screen that weren't quite finished, or that were questionable in the time that we had, then it would jeopardize the whole idea of shooting against LED screens. So my pitch was, let's throw photographs up there. We should test environments in the game engine, but let's also test photography. Because if I believe that the top left guy is on the salt flats, and I believe that those salt flats is a photograph, I'm not going to question it not being real. I'm just going to question the lighting contribution, and that was really important. But of course, with that, you can't test everything without having environments close to camera, parallaxing, full 3D. So this is an environment that was built in the virtual art department by Andrew Jones's team that he pulled together. And the idea here, of course, it was an idea from The Jungle Book that Andrew Jones worked on with Jon Favreau. And the idea, of course, is the actor is walking on a treadmill. He's moving the treadmill himself, which is in turn hooked into the game engine and driving the environment past the camera. At the same time, there is a projector up in the corner that has a corresponding camera within the game engine. That camera in the game engine is looking at Mando and is occluded from with the buildings moving past him. So when all of a sudden the camera looking past Mando, at the sun, once the buildings don't occlude the sun, it sees the light, the projector turns on, casts a light on Mando. Really, really clever, but really simple trick that John brought to the party, and we obviously tested on the day. And then this was our eureka moment. I think people may have heard about the Angel Island test. This was my kind of get out of jail free card by pulling Enrico Dam onto the show. I knew that Enrico had been doing a lot of work with photogrammetry. And he's the kind of artist that not only does it on shows, but also does it in his spare time. And that's really important because it provides us with material that we can use in demos. You know, I couldn't throw up an environment from Bumblebee, which they had amazing photogrammetry on that particular movie. But I knew he had an environment from Angel Island that I'd heard a lot about. And I called him and said, hey, is it ready for prime time? Can we throw it up in the volume? And he said, yeah, it's all done. And he showed me some quick times moving through it. And of course, because it's photogrammetry and because it's a very textural environment, it was completely photoreal. So the idea was of course, to throw it up on the screen and have the camera move freely within this environment to see if you believed it. And this was the first time that we brought photoreal content close to the actor. Obviously, the lat longs, it's 40 miles away. Yes, there's a little bit of parallax, but it's not the same illusion. The idea of putting photogrammetry around the actor and a room around the actor and having walk around in there, this was the moment where everybody thought, this is going to work. Greg Fraser walked straight from the stage when this immediately came on the LEDs and walked over to John and said, I thought this would work, but I didn't think it was going to work quite as well as this does. This is amazing. And from this point on, there was a shift. There was a shift towards traditional visual effects solves for photoreal content. Of course, the thing that we had to take in consideration was that we had to get all of this visual effects work into the game engine. And what would that look like for us? And of course, that was then the next phase after the June test.
So the interesting thing to me here, and as we start to get into this kind of new workflow, is you're not really talking shots and frames anymore. You're starting to talk about shooting footage, which is something that is just a different way of thinking. You know, your background, you know, in building environments. I mean, you've done that throughout your career. I mean, I can even think back of, I believe it was Iron Man 2 when you built that whole thing leading up to the Stark layer,
right.
is building these environments. But the interesting thing to me now is that you're creating something that is one-to-one with the physical environment or the set that's there, or just, you know, that the character can interface with that. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what that means for how you approach things? Because I mean, it seems like, again, instead of breaking things down according to shot, you're taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture of the entire scene.
You are, absolutely. But by the same token, if you boil it down to what's boring about visual effects, which is shot counts and schedules, you are effectively processing in the same way. So what I ended up doing very early on, and I'll get into the collaboration because that's actually the most important and interesting part of this, is that it was a mind shift. But by the same token, if you've got a scene, if you've got 30 shots in a scene, and you are going to turn up to a traditional stage with green screen, and everywhere you point the camera, there's green. You know, you got 30 visual effect shots. In this particular scenario, that set extension is on the LED screen. And so therefore you've got 30 shots, you've got 30 in-camera finals. But do you? The calculations you have to make is a little bit more in depth now, and has to happen earlier on. And your ability to predict becomes critical, because you might be spending 80% of the same cost to build the environment to put on the screen ahead of time, but you're to a certain extent needing to guarantee it's going to work, because you don't get to spend that 80% again in post if it doesn't work. Now, John, I have to say, is incredibly collaborative, but more importantly, he thoroughly understands the technology and the risks involved. And so when he approves an environment, when he buys into what's going to go on the screen, that's it. As far as he's concerned, we make that work. He's not going to change it. He's not going to have a change of mind. We're not going to switch out the sky later on. We're not going to redesign the building unless there's a story point that comes up in the editorial process, which is incredibly rare for us to do a shift like this. It's gonna play. So the pressure gets heaped on. And so what you end up doing is you look at those 30 shots and say, okay, I'm going to start out with a wide, and then I'm going to go into start with 2 wides, 2 establishing shots, and then go into my medium and then the close up into the coverage. So that the wide, okay, I can hazard a guess that in the wide, I'm probably going to have the camera outside the volume, and I'm going to see the back of the LED screens, and I'm really just photographing this element here, and we need to build everything out around the sides. Great. That's a post-production shot. That's one. The second one is probably going to go into a little bit tighter, but now I'm probably seeing the gap between the physical stage and the LED. Maybe the focus is really deep, and there's a fall-off concern. Okay. 2 visual effects shots. I'm going to roto everybody off. Let's say that. And now I'm going to get into the coverage. Now it's going to have to work. So now I'm going to say that we're going to get into 18 shots of coverage. They're all going to have to be in camera. And then we're going to go over a different character now, looking slightly out of the volume. Well, that's where the door is, where the seam is. Okay. So now I'm going to have, X number of shots where I'm going to fix that seam, but that's going to be a really, really cheap visual effects fix and not putting the background in green screen. So now you have to break those 30 shots down like that to understand where you're spending your money and what you need to get out of the work on the day. And that's what I had to have that's what I had to communicate with the DPs, because they have this amazing lighting tool. They've got a sky that they can grab and they can rotate 180. So depending on what angle they do, it's like, well, I prefer the clouds over here. Well, that's wonderful. But when you move the clouds around, you're perhaps taking a mounting range with it because it's built into photography that John's approved. And that mounting range isn't supposed to be there. And then the question comes up, well, you guys can fix that. Well, yes, we can. But here's the percentage of in-camera finals we're looking for. And so in prep, we had these in-depth conversations about what we expected to get on the day, and everybody bought into it. So when we did arrive on the day and Baz or Greg needed to have a different sky, then we provided the environment to have a different sky. We provided the environment to move the sky without the mountain. Or Greg or Baz would come up to me and say, hey, I want to move this sky because I think it's a better composition. What does that mean for you? I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, Baz, the 2 wides are in camera. They worked so well. And I'd factored those to be my post shot. So do it. Go for your life. So there's this constant kind of give and take that happens between all the different department heads to make sure that what we're shooting is what John expects. And what John's expecting is that what we're shooting against the LED screen is going to provide to us a majority of in-camera finals, because that was the moonshot that he wanted. And I was incredibly thankful that it worked out that way. Actually, Miles, let me jump to the cantina.
Awesome.
Because I think I think it's relevant in this context. So I'm going to screen share. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to hit share. And I'm going to hit play. So, for example, the cantina. People have asked, a lot of times, did you think you were doing anything new and groundbreaking with the technology? And people have asked about, in a roundabout way, how much high-fiving was there going on set? How much backslapping because this was working? And I can tell you there was absolutely none, not at all. Because every day ILM and the VAD were needed to stay on track to provide the next set and the next set and the next set. And there was 110 of them. And each one was unlike the previous and was frightening. And this was one of them, because this was an environment, of course, that everybody's familiar with. It's the cantina from A New Hope. And the idea of putting the cantina on the LED screen, providing the audience with an environment they were incredibly familiar with, and not tipping our hat off to the technology, for me was high risk strategy, but that's how John operates. And without his constant pushing, without his belief, without him questioning everybody all the time, we wouldn't have been anywhere close to the success we had on the show with the technology. And I'm thankful for that. But at the time, boy, oh boy, was it difficult to process how we were going to do the show. So to this particular visual, this is the cantina. This, of course, was the virtual art department blocked this out, handed it over to ILM. This is the work that ILM did in 3ds Max and V-Ray before they then baked it and built it in Unreal and made sure it was performance. It looks spectacular. It's amazing. You put frame to frame up with the original, and all the detail is there. And so the idea that this went on the screen was frightening to me because of this reason. This is behind the scenes iPhone footage that I shot of what we actually had on the day. So what you can see is the booth that the kid was sat in on screen left there. We had the bar and the bar back with the red and the yellow light, and that was it. We had a floor, of course, and 1 or 2 tables. But what you can see off in the distance behind the ladder is the LED screen 35 feet away, which is obviously going to cause an issue with focus. And on the right side, the screen is 2 feet away from the bar back and 8 feet away from the right side. So you can imagine walking into this bar, Mando's POV looking at that bartender, the robot. It's like the right and the left side of frame is going to be on the screen apart from the archway and directly behind the bar. And I felt that this was going to be really, really challenging for a lot of reasons. We all had concerns about focus. So this was one of the few scenes where the previous work that the third floor did was absolutely vital, because we prevised out every camera angle and we made sure that it worked. And what John was interested in is that when we prevised other scenes, it was really to get an understanding of the blocking and the kinds of shots we were going to get. But he knew that if the shot broke, the magic trick, then we changed the shot. So he had Baz.
Now you consider that, I just want to go back to one thing that you said there. You called it previs, and I think previs has a certain, you're kind of almost talking tech viz though here, right? Because the visualization they were doing was telling you whether or not this was going to work.
It was 2 things. So we had the virtual art department working in Unreal with headsets, scouting an environment. At the same time, we had those environments going over to the third floor where they would then take them into Maya, and then they would previs the scene out. We actually prevised everything out. So the whole story, the dialogue was prevised out for the entire season. But when they put their cameras in the set was taken directly from the virtual art department. So we knew from a footprint standpoint, it was accurate to where the LED screen was. So in the third floor previs, we had the horseshoe of the LED screen. So if the previs wanted to back the camera up, the camera would go through the LED screen, and you would realize we can't do that shot. By the same token, we had the partial set in there and the LED screen with the mapped image. So we understood that if all of a sudden we were looking at the archway and it split the LED screen in half, and we were focused on the archway, the LED screen in the background was not going to be in focus and needed to be together. So everything was managed, and every camera angle was thought out and then tech vised in a traditional way with camera heights and whatnot to make sure that we shot it the way it was previous, the way we knew it was going to work. And that was the only way this incredibly small set was going to work with an LED screen that was 30 feet beyond where it needed to be. And so moving to the next image, next slide, this is the scene. And I have to say, it worked incredibly well. This is practical. Mando's POV is what you've just seen. So only the bar back and the bar around was physical. So every time you see deep into the back wall, like there, that's all on the LED screen. And when you're sat with the kid and we're over the kid to the back wall, it's all on the LED screen. Half of the ceiling was on the LED screen, half was practical. And so the only visual effect shots in this entire scene was the hologram of Fennec and painting out the rods on the barman's, on the puppet on the elbows. That was it. Everything else was completely in camera. And there's nobody at the beginning of this process, before we started shooting in October, that ever would have thought that this would have been the outcome. Because until you try it, You simply don't know.
Right.
And the other thing
so,
that makes this important, people ask specifically with this environment, why? And there's many reasons if you talk to John. One of them is studio footprint. We don't have 24 sound stages like some of the movies have had in the past. We had 3. And we had to shoot 4 to 5 hours of material for 8 episodes. And so we needed to keep our stage space to a minimum. So that meant that construction had to build smaller sets. But if you remember back to Doug Chan's aspirational artwork, his sets weren't small. So Andrew Jones, through working on Jungle Book with Jon Favreau, they'd come up with this technique of building partial sets on 20 by 20 rolling decks and bringing them into a smaller space against green screen. We did the same thing, but with an LED screen. So the big sets were built on the content, which made for our stage space to be smaller. Now, that's not to say we didn't have big sets, because we had 2 other physical stages with very large sets, and we had a parking lot. But the entire 8 episodes were shot on the LED screen for about 50% of all scenes. The rest was shot against 2 stages with blue screen and 1 parking lot. And all the sets that were rolled in on decks occupied the 2 stages, and that was it.
So it sounds like it really, even the production design, it flipped that on its head of what you would and wouldn't do for speed reasons, but also for kind of what you needed. And then the other component here really is, it seems like there was a little bit more exploration in what you could do once you're there. Can you speak a little bit to that, and you know, what latitude? Because one of the things that I was also struck by, and you kind of touched on this a little earlier, is when decisions get made. Because I remember visiting you last year, and that was one thing that you were saying, is that this does flip things on its head as to when do decisions get made, and you know, and do those supersede something that, you know, maybe John thought, no, I want this to be this way.
Right.
You know, like, how do you, now that you've gone through this process quite a bit, I'm assuming that there are takeaways that you have. There are things that you've said, okay, this is how we are going to operate with regard to what you can and can't do. These are the scenes that work, and these are the scenes that don't work. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the learnings coming out of this?
Yeah. We're completely off script, by the way. It's interesting because, you know, one thing to answer that question, I think I've got to just, you know, shine a light on Andrew Jones in particular, who is an absolute force of nature. You know, I worked for 23 years in games and visual effects. And, you know, we all work with people who are hardworking and who are brilliant. Andrew Jones is very much in the top tier of people I've ever come across. He's astonishingly talented and one of the most hardworking people I've ever had the fortune to work alongside. He works on a computer and he gets it. He builds the environments and he helps solve the problems. He has the unenviable task of being the first person to take Doug's aspirational art, which is spectacular. And when I say Doug's art, Doug obviously has a art department team of, you know, Ryan Church, Out Tiemens, and a whole bunch of other incredibly talented artists that really don't limit themselves, understandably. And then Andrew Jones has to take those designs and tries to bend them to this technology and to our stage space. And that can be, you know, that can be just the physical stages that we have outside of the LED screens. And so in doing that, what ends up happening is you have to collaborate with people, because obviously it's I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. Andrew will come up to me and say, "Hey, Rich, we're going to build this tank. I can give you the gun. I can give you the hatch. I can give you one tread. Can you do the rest?" I say, "Well, I tell you, if you give me the tread and give me the top, I can do the gun because we're going to do it this way. We need to move it anyway." And he said, "Okay, good." And that's how we operate. And what typically happens is in a regular show, a lot of shows, visual effects during prep and during shooting is really helping everybody along until it's their time. And in post is really when visual effects operates in a really comfortable bubble. They're usually working with the editors and the directors or the showrunners, and they basically get to remember, along with the filmmakers, everything that's been discussed with all different departments and start to execute. And you have production designer, you have DPs, you have gaffers, you have art department, set decorators, everybody else that used to be involved in the show, waiting to see what happens. And oftentimes, information gets lost. And with this particular process, we're basically taking 110 set extensions and doing them in prep with every department head involved. And I don't mean every department head, but every other department. So you might have folks from the paint shop needing to know what color we're going to paint a CG wall, because they're going to do the same thing physically in the foreground, or vice versa. They're going to paint something, visual effects has to photograph it and then send it to ILM to make sure that they match it. In addition to that, Amanda, who's a wonderful, wonderful set decorator, now has the opportunity not only to do set decorating physically on a stage, but then it gets to stand behind an artist and say, yeah, I wouldn't put that there. And this is the reason why. Because as soon as we do a shot like this, it's going to stack up. Now, we would find that out in post through an iterative process. We can now do it in Game Engine, of course, and we can do that stuff early. We can move things around, and we have this time where we're effectively rapid prototyping, where we are having DPs light the scene, set decorators move things around, switching out different colors, switching out different lights on walls, switching out skies. Let's push the wall back. Let's bring the wall back in. Let's put the Razor Crest off in the distance, see what that looks like. Let's spin it around 180. And it involves every creative on the show that has a voice, typically, if it was physical. And John encourages everybody to have a voice. And visual effects' responsibility with the production designer and the VAD is to allow everybody to have that involvement and to be nimble. And the idea is that while the work is within the VAD, that's the rapid prototyping. That's where the decisions get made. Because once that period of time is over, regardless of what that environment is, it has to be turned over to ILM. It could be a grayscale box, or it could be something that is rather more fleshed out with textures and really good lighting. But regardless, it's what gets turned over are decisions. Because what John knows really, really well is once it gets turned over to ILM into the visual effects technique, is that ILM could be stripping that scene down into very fundamental parts. They might be switching out parts to the parts library. Maybe we're setting a scene next to an ATST crashed on the ground. Well, ILM's going to bring in the high-res asset, and they're going to start with that. So let's figure out where the ATST is in real time, and then let's switch it out. But by the same token, we might be building a miniature. We might be going to a location to photograph a sky or a mountain range. And so everybody got to the point where they understood how they needed to contribute, when they needed to contribute. When John said something was done and needed to be turned over to ILM, and at that point, we started reviewing things in a very typical visual effects fashion, where at this point, now we're blowing stuff up on a big screen. There's a room full of people, and John is pointing at texture and lighting and shading models and spec levels and tweaking them until he knew when he had to stop, because a week later, it had to be performant. It was shooting on the screen. And if he didn't stop, it wouldn't shoot.
Right. Interesting. So, I mean, it sounds like you guys employed every technique in the book to really be able to bring these real-time environments. Can you tell me a little bit more about the different approaches you took to generate the 110, I guess, environments that you needed?
That's right. It was 45 different scenes. So some of the environments had different lighting conditions. So maybe one was a nighttime scene, one was a daytime scene. Maybe one of those scenes was at the bottom of the cliff, one was at the top of the cliff. But through the 110 different environments that had to play, we did a variety of things, of course. We had scenes that were built natively in Unreal. Obviously, you guys at Epic helped us with the Ice Lake environment, and then ILM picked it up for the final version. That was native in Unreal. But then we had an awful lot of environments that were built in either Maya or Max and V-Ray. We built miniatures where we used photogrammetry techniques to take the geometry of the miniature and the texture, and then transferred that into the game engine because it was the quickest way for us to build that particular environment. We went on location and photographed lat longs that we basically put on various cards to plane them against each other. We went to real locations and shot interiors, again with photogrammetry or with LiDAR, to then build that as a fully 3D environment similar to the Angel Island. And of course, we relied heavily on ILM's backlot. Of course, the Roost Hangar, for example, leveraged props and assets across a multitude of Star Wars projects, whether it was from Solo, from Rogue, or from some of the ride films that we've done. We leverage everything that we could, which is how John likes to work. And of course, we had scenes like in 105, the space scene, where not only we had hyperspace, but we had basic stars. While at the same time, Dave Filoni, who directed the episode, had a game controller. At this particular instance, it was the iPad, and he was able to kind of fire off pews, right or left, fire a pew with a flak burst and create damage. And the actor was able to respond to what he was seeing on the screen with the close calls that these blaster fire were actually having while being triggered by the director. So it was every trick in the book, as well as shooting rolling footage and then having that play back on the screens as well.
So I do want to encourage, looking at the time, if people want to ask questions, they can do so in Facebook Live or in Zoom. So please funnel any questions that anyone may have there, and I'll try to do my best to answer or to ask them. You just brought up Dave Filoni, and another experience that I had was a brief conversation where he said that his mind is open to storytelling possibilities. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because my assumption is, through the course of the season, that there was a certain understanding of what could and couldn't be done. And I would imagine that, people always think of that as a limiting thing. Okay, well, I can't do this. But it also means that there are things that maybe you can do that you could never do before. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I'm going to try and talk about that without giving anything away. Yes, you're right. I think what's been fascinating with the technology is a couple of things. If John and Dave were here today, I would encourage them to talk about, because it's what interests me, about what inspires them when they're writing. Because obviously Dave, as we all know, is a writer director, and obviously John the same. And typically they'll get their inspiration from other stories, from other movies, from other filmmakers, from imagery from around the world. John gets a lot of inspiration from SpaceX technology, with it being close friends with Elon, and obviously paying close attention to what they're doing right now. But by the same token, what we ended up finding out was that the actual LED technology itself started inspiring ideas and story points, because we'd be sat there on set. And I remember it was actually the same day we were shooting the Cantina. And John had spoken about making sure we start funneling imagery through to him of wild-looking environments to help foster new ideas. And at the same time, he said, if you've got any ideas about how we can use the LED technology, let's hear it, because that could also play into the storytelling. And then he started spinning a few ideas he was already having about, what if we could do this with the LEDs? What if we could do this? Have we thought about doing this? And I'd love to tell you what those things are, but we're using a lot of them because rumor has it we're working on season 2 right now. And that's been fascinating. And Dave did the same thing in a sense that he saw how other filmmakers on season 1 used the LED screens, and then started tweaking environments and tweaking his ideas, because what he wanted to do was get the visuals on the screen of an environment to allow the camera operators to frame up against what the story beats that Dave wanted to display, which is something that John is a big proponent of. And that is give the DP, give the camera operators what it is they're supposed to be composing against, which is why he wanted to move away from green screen as quickly as possible, and what obviously he sought to do on the Jungle Book when they're doing simulcam.
Yeah. So I have a question from the audience here. What was the actual shooting schedule per episode, and how many different live action units were working?
Yeah. So originally it was we were looking at 10 days per episode to shoot. What ended up how it ended up working was I think it was largely 10 days plus maybe 4 more pickups. And typically we went in with 1 unit, but then we ended up branching and having 2 units. And basically what ended up happening was that those last 4 days was usually a second unit shoot to pick up anything that didn't involve the main cast. So that's typically how we did it. Main unit for the 10 days and then second unit for the next 4 days, when the main unit then moved on to the next episode. So it was breakneck speed. And there was only a few occasions where we did block shooting because of a particular standing set that we had. Typically we shot 1 episode, then the next, and so on and so forth.
Okay. I have someone else asking the question here. Did you have to design sequence around the technology? For example, the scene on the barge and the lava and at the end of the show, that seemed to be designed specifically around the shooting restrictions. Do you think this has partly defined the feel of the show?
The technology absolutely has defined the feel. Yeah, there's no two ways about that. But what I will say is that no, John does not write to fit in a box. Doug doesn't design to fit in a box. So that lava sequence was in the writing from the very beginning, before we even knew technology was going to work. If you trace back the artwork, of which there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of artwork, there are gags and scenes that were designed before the idea of LEDs was discussed. So that's where the heavy lift came from people like Andrew Jones, the DPs, other heads of departments, to figure out, okay, so we're shooting on in lava tunnel, and John is interested to explore that in the volume. How on earth are we going to do this? And then Andrew Jones comes up with the ideas. Well, if we have the background moving and we do the projector gag, then all of a sudden we'll tie the two together and it won't feel synthetic with the motion. So, and that would happen all the time. John's pitch was, well, let's throw in the volume, let's see what the solve is, and come to me if you think it's impossible to shoot it in the volume. And that's how we operated. We had to give it the best shot it could do. And the only really limiting factor was direct sun. The majority of the time we chose to shoot things outside against direct sun because obviously we couldn't mimic that believably in the volume across the whole stage floor. And other scenes like the bar at the end that gets shot up, the reason that was always going to be on the stage is because we needed to destroy it. We couldn't do massive pyro in the volume. So it became very obvious which scenes were going to be not on the volume, but then everything else we had to find a way.
Okay. There was another question here. Is there still a role for the traditional DP, or do you all become DPs? And I have a...
Oh my word. The DP in this, I mean, they are more present. They are right at the front of the line because they've got the greatest lighting tool they've ever had for a stage, and they can now manipulate anything they want. And so what became clear to me was that it was a huge education for me to understand every department's point of view quickly, because it had a direct impact against the percentage of in-camera finals we thought we were going to get, back to the conversation at the very, very beginning. And so therefore, if the DP needed flexibility, I needed to figure out a way to provide it.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm always struck with the fact that the DP really actually has the ability to completely affect the world like a deity, which
Yeah.
is, that's the thing that's so amazing about it. They really bring their craft to the set, which is amazing. Well, I think we're coming up on the hour. Richard, I want to say what a pleasure it is. I do. There was one question that I should probably end on, and the reason why I should end on it is because they gave you the proper name in front. They said sir. So Sir Richard Bluff, I teased you about that earlier today. What tricks, subjects that are different from traditional visual effects should a student learn to get a job in the future ILM?
Say that one more time, Miles.
So what tricks or areas of study should students try to learn in order to get a job in this future, they said the future island, but I think in the future of this industry when we're dealing with virtual production?
Yeah, so I mean, as you well know, you know my background, and you also know that I've done a few talks at universities over the years, and my answer 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago is the same today. As far as I'm concerned, it's be well-rounded. Because in order to have the conversations with set decorator, with a gaffer, with a DP, with a director, with the paint shop, with a production designer, you need to understand, you need to appreciate every facet of what goes into creating a shot. Now, I have my strengths and I have an awful lot of weaknesses, and for me, I try to surround myself with people that are far more talented and fill in the holes. And you know, when I point at someone like Landis Fields, who is astonishingly talented across a wide variety of techniques, there's a reason why he's involved in this show. Jason Porter, that was the other visual effects supervisor with me, my partner in crime on season 1, again, so incredibly talented and a broad array of talent. There's a reason why he was on this project. And you can go down the list. Enrico Dam, again, another one that can comp, light, model, texture, everything. And I think that's what sets people apart. And I don't think you need to be exceptional in every aspect of that. And if you wanna focus that, then so be it. But appreciate everything that goes into the shot. Try to do it all. Have a go, and I think you'll understand what it'll take to partner with all of these different departments on a film set with this kind of technology.
Wonderful. Richard, it is always a pleasure to sit down and talk to you. Next time we'll be on a stage and actually maybe able to have a beer together or something like that. For the audience members, just want to let you guys know that this talk will be available soon. So they're recording it, and we'll share it soon. So thanks everybody for taking the time to be with us today, and look forward to the next season. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.